Thank you, Jack, and good morning, everybody. I did
it again.
That's the one. Left or right, by the way?
Right is right.
Okay. Even if we didn't live in the current training climate where demand for good candidates is in danger of outstripping supply, we're always looking to maximize the effectiveness of our training and our training programs. Now, if you want to do that, it's worth thinking about what it is that inhibits the progress of a trainee through a training program. Now, sometimes I'll grant you it's a lack of knowledge or it's a poor work ethic, but I think, more often than not, it's a mismanaged emotional reaction, an emotional barrier or encumbrance of some sort that inhibits the pilot's progress. Now, why is that? Let me give you the bad news first. Human beings are not supposed to fly. We're not naturally equipped for it. The only reason we can is thanks to this extraordinary device. That's the brain, for those of you unfamiliar. Or more specifically, this section of it, the neocortex, what I actually call the human brain. Lots of animals have a cortex, but as far as we can tell, only humans have the capacity to imagine things that do not physically exist in the world. So when we are faced with a problem, such as I want to fly, we can imagine what the solution to that problem would look like, create the solution, and act on it. It gives us an enormous evolutionary advantage, but it's only thanks to the operation of that section of our brain, the human brain, the cognitive brain that we use for conscious thought, that we can fly, something we have no natural right to be doing. Now, the rest of the brain contains lots of complex and interactive parts, but I like, and so do others actually, to lump it all together and call it the chimp brain. This deals with all the stuff that goes on without our thinking about it. We don't want to be thinking about our digestion, or our heart rate, or how to stand upright. It's all taken care of by the chimp brain, the sum total of automatic responses necessary for survival. So that's the duality, if you like, at the center of the human condition. It makes sense, I think, therefore, that when my primitive animal self perceives some potential threat to its survival, it's the automatic chimp brain that responds instantaneously in the form of stress. The hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flood into the bloodstream, the muscles tighten, the breathing and heart rates increase, the pupils dilate. The body gets prepared either to attack the threat or to run away, the fight or flight response. But is it fight or is it flight? Well, that depends on the particular emotional response that is simultaneously triggered by the chimp brain. With the body prepped for fight or flight, the chimp brain will respond to the threat probably with anxiety. We opt for flight and we run away, and thus we survive. It's a perfectly natural, normal, automatic process that has kept human beings alive for their entire evolutionary history. However, human beings have invented for themselves this modern world, using our intelligent and creative and cognitive human brain abilities. That doesn't mean that the emotional center is irrelevant. Anyone who attended the resilience workshop this morning will have learned that our emotions are needed to guide our actions, particularly in new situations. But it's when our actions are dictated by the automatic emotional responses of the chimp brain that the resultant behavior in this modern world can often be unhelpful. It's easy to spot unhelpful behavior. It's where after the fact you say, good grief, what on earth was I thinking? Chances are you weren't, at least not in the sense of using the human brain. In particular, pilots and pilots under training, as I say, operate in a world that is only possible thanks to the operation of their human brains. Sadly, it can get a bit stressful at times. So let's imagine a trainee pilot. We'll call him Bob. Don't know why. And Bob's task today is to manually fly an ILS approach. Now, I don't want to be too technical, because conceivably there are people in the room that aren't pilots. Yeah, or not. The vertically oriented pink diamond towards the middle of that picture there is the glide slope indicator. What Bob has to do is keep that in the middle, and the aircraft will follow the required flight path all the way down to the runway. But let's say that in the latter stages of the approach, Bob's attention wavers for a second or two and the aircraft deviates below the required flight path. His flight path monitoring ability temporarily wanes. It's a mistake. The solution is relatively straightforward. Adjust your pitch attitude slightly, maybe a power setting. But that's a human brain, cognitive thought solution to the problem. Human beings have only had that capacity for maybe the last 70,000 years, and we've been flying for barely 100. That can't compete with billions of years' worth of evolved instinct that simply says problem equals threat equals stress. And hard on the heels of the stress response to the problem comes the automatic emotional response. Probably for Bob, it's anxiety. Poor old Bob. At the exact moment he needs his human brain to provide the solution to the problem, his chimp brain is the active part, and it's screaming at him to do something, anything really, now. And that's exactly what it is. And it does anything. He will over-control, or he will freeze up entirely, or he'll blurt out some words from some other procedure entirely. Any instructors in the room will have seen this sort of thing in their trainees. Someone is nodding, all right, at least one. He will do anything, in other words, other than what is required of him. If Bob doesn't do what we need him to do, he will not progress through training, and by definition, our training is rendered less effective. So what to do about this situation? It's not a problem, it's a situation. Well, we start by recognizing that there is no such thing as an emotional overreaction. I'll say that again. Emotionally speaking, there is no such thing as an overreaction. This is because that for every given individual experiencing some emotive activating event or other, there will be an emotional consequence, but not as the direct result. Rather, there will be some internal thought process or belief. Now, belief is a useful word. It starts with B. It makes everything neat and tidy. But it's not a human brain conscious belief that we have chosen to have. This is some subconscious or even unconscious thought process or belief, very firmly in chimp brain territory, that is activated by the event and goes on in turn to trigger the emotional consequence. That emotional consequence will be in proportion to the belief. It may seem like an overreaction to the event, but if we understand the belief part, the emotional consequence will make sense as well. If we want to manage someone's emotional reactions, it's that belief in the middle that we need to understand. So what's Bob got going on? His activating event is the deviation below the glide slope. It triggers the belief, I'm losing control. And the inevitable emotional consequence of that is anxiety. But here's where it gets complicated. On another day, we have a different trainee called Jeff. And Jeff harbors the internal belief, come on, I should know this. If that is triggered by the activating event, his emotional consequence will be anger. And on another day, we have Susan. And Susan harbors the belief, I am failing, or I'm a failure. If that's triggered by this exact same activating event, her emotional consequence will be some form of depression. Now, it's worth pointing out that anger, fear, and depression are the stock-in-trade of the chimp brain. Whenever we see unhelpful behavior in the world, it's probably the result of one or a combination of those. But the specific emotional response of any given individual will depend on the particular belief that forms part of that individual's psychological makeup. If we accept, then, that effective training incorporates management of emotional reactions, then the most effective training will be that is centered on the specific emotional reaction of the particular trainee. Projectors down, boss. It's all right. It's blank. You keep going. Trainee-centred training, in other words, is the most effective. Now, when a psychotherapist is brought in to treat someone with, say, clinical depression or generalized anxiety disorder, their job is to manage their client's emotional reactions in order to produce more helpful behavior. It strikes me, therefore, that we in the world of flight training might have something to learn from the realm of psychotherapy. Here we're looking for a trainee-centred approach to training. Is there a psychotherapeutic approach from which we could learn? Goodness me, yes there is. It's called person-centred psychotherapy. What techniques, then, does a person-centered psychotherapist use with their client that an instructor can use with his or her trainee? Well, the first point concerns the sorts of people we want to be instructors. They require lots of different characteristics, but I want to submit that the most important is the quality of emotional intelligence. Reason being that the emotionally intelligent individual carries with them a high degree of empathy. Now, that's not just to understand how someone else feels. That's kind of sympathy, really. Empathy is where I, on some level, feel the same that you feel. To explain, most of us have at some point in this life probably read a novel or at least experienced being told a story. Right? The most effective stories are the ones where we experience it from the standpoint of the storyteller. Now, that works when it's a creative author producing a work of fiction, but it also works when it's a real person telling us something that really happened to them. And a connection based on empathy is where we put ourselves in that person's position and we understand that story in terms of their thought processes and their emotional reactions. And by doing that, I can align my thought processes and emotional reactions with theirs, making it much easier to understand the beliefs and manage the emotional reactions. Now, of course, getting someone to tell a very personal story about what's going on in their mind and what their emotional reactions truly are can be quite daunting for that person. Makes one feel very vulnerable. It's vitally important, therefore, to create an encouraging and accepting environment for that to happen. So, when a therapist wants to discuss the unhelpful behavior of their client, they tend not to use the word you. You did that and it went badly for you. Because that's an accusation, or it sounds like one. It sounds very much like blame. Blame makes people become defensive. They don't want to make themselves more vulnerable. They will not give that true account of what's going on in their head. So when discussing unhelpful behavior, the therapist will instead use the word we. Well, we engaged in a spot of unhelpful behavior, didn't we? However, when the behavior that is manifest is more helpful, that's when we deploy the word you, or whatever works in your particular language, clearly. Well, we were in an unhelpful situation, but you sorted it out. Well done, you. Not only does this create the accepting and encouraging environment that we seek, but it's also a good example of positive reinforcement. Now, that's not just, positive reinforcement is not just being nice or being soft on our trainees. It's a form of behavioral conditioning. Psychologist called Skinner did an experiment back in the 50s where he took a rat and he put the rat in a box. Now, I'm simplifying the details here, but essentially in the box was a red button and a green button. And sometimes this rat would press the red button. And when it did so, the poor creature got a nasty electric shock. Sometimes the rat would press the green button. And when it did, absolutely nothing happened. This form of conditioning is called punishment. This would be in flight training world where the instructor sees Bob makes a mistake and shouts at him and calls him names. Or as one of my senior colleagues once said, deploys a taser. I'm going to assume he was joking. Now, in another box was another rat, and this rat was being exposed to an ongoing loud and unpleasant noise. This rat would press the red button, but when it did so, nothing happened. However, the rat would sometimes press the green button, and when it did that, the nasty noise stopped, albeit temporarily. This is negative reinforcement. We reinforce the behavior that we want to see by providing temporary relief from ongoing nastiness. The human equivalent is paying an annual tax bill. In another box was another rat. Now, this rat would press the red button, and again, nothing would happen. But when this rat chanced to press the green button, the rat was rewarded with a little treat. This is positive reinforcement. When we see the behavior that we want to see, we positively, actively reinforce that behavior through reward. And the nice thing about this is, it is automatically trainee-centred, because it's the specific behavior of the trainee that has produced a positive outcome that we seek to reinforce through reward. Might not be how I do it, but it worked for this guy, so well done. Keep doing it. Now, whilst a therapist is engaged in this process, they also practice CPR. But it ain't what you think. It's the constant positive regard. The what now? This means I hold the client, whatever they've done, separate from their behavior. I separate the behavior from the person, and I hold the person in a constant positive regard. The person is a good person, regardless of how they've behaved. Now, as you can imagine, that can be quite a challenge for the therapist, because some people behave in some fairly nasty ways. Can also be a sort of a challenge for the instructor. Let's go back to Bob. Bob, we say in the briefing room, this aircraft is sensitive to large changes in the power setting, so don't make large power changes. It will affect your ability to hold it on the glide slope. Okay, says Bob. Off we go. Attempt number 1. And what does Bob do? Of course, he makes large power changes and the aircraft wobbles and spirals its way down the approach towards the runway. Okay, Bob, we did talk about this 10 minutes ago. Talk about what? Large power changes. That's why you were doing it, that's why it went wrong. Oh, gosh, sorry, I didn't realize. It's okay. So, don't do large power changes. All right, I understand, says Bob. We try it again. He does the same thing. Makes large power changes and we get full coverage of the ILS envelope on our way down to the runway. Bob, literally 2 minutes ago, I said, don't make large power changes. Well, I wasn't. You were, was I? God, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't do it. All right, okay, I understand this time. Good. Off we go, attempt number 3. Bob makes large power changes and the aircraft wobbles and spirals its way down the approach. Now, as an instructor, I've got to check my emotional reactions at that point. What's my ABC? Because it's a logical possibility that the reason behind Bob's unhelpful behavior are that he's lazy or stupid or doing it on purpose just to spite me. It's possible, but it's rather unlikely in reality. But in my heightened emotional state, I'm losing the ability to perceive that reality. My emotional consequence of anger is likely to lead to the unhelpful behavior of blaming the trainee. Bob is lazy, stupid, or doing it on purpose. However, I'm going to use my person-centred psychotherapy techniques on Bob and try and improve his performance. Because what I don't want to do is outwardly behave that way. He's going to get vulnerable. I lose all hope of managing his emotional reactions. His performance, if anything, will deteriorate. Firstly, the constant positive regard. Okay, Bob is a good person. He is doing his best. Yes, his behavior is unhelpful. His behavior is indeed upsetting to me, but it's not his job to make me happy. It's his job to keep the thing on the glide slope. So I can eliminate those 3 less likely possibilities as reasons for his unhelpful behavior and hone in on what's really going on. Now I create the accepting and encouraging environment and get him to tell his story so I can connect with him on an empathetic level. Bob, we were making some large power changes there, I think, weren't we? We got a bit low on the glide slope in the end, didn't we? Yeah? Okay. Talk me through what was going on for you at that moment in your head. What were you thinking? What were your emotional reactions? And as Bob does that, I'm going to try and put myself in his place. Well, it was all going fine, but then, the glide slope went and I lost control of it and, I started to panic and I guess that's why I overreacted. Bob, stop. Thanks. Brilliant. I'm losing control. I get it now, having achieved an empathetic connection. For Bob, that's his belief. It could have been, I should know this. It could have been, I'm failing. Could have been any number of things, but for Bob, it's, I'm losing control. Well, of course, when the activating event occurs, he's going to have his emotional consequence of anxiety. Of course. But now I understand his belief, I can try this. Bob, at that range, a deviation on the glide slope of that magnitude is what, 80 feet or so? Would we really call that losing control? Well, I suppose, when you put it like that, yeah. How do you normally deal with a deviation of 80 feet in altitude? Well, I would adjust my pitch attitude by ½ a degree. Brilliant. Then that's the behavior I want you to exhibit, or words to that effect. What we've done, continuing our positive and affirming and encouraging and accepting mode, is challenge that belief. And the emotional consequence goes with it. Now, when we take Bob and put him in the same situation, he may well experience the same activating event, but it's no longer evidence for the belief, I'm losing control. The emotional consequence hopefully doesn't flow. We've bought him the few seconds that he needs for his human brain to activate and provide the required solution to the problem. He adjusts his pitch attitude, he recovers the glide slope, and when we see that behavior, well done, Bob. We give him a little treat. Folks, the job of a psychotherapist is to manage their client's emotional reactions in order to help that person function better in everyday life. The job of a flight instructor, I would submit, is to manage their trainees' emotional reactions in order to help them better fly aeroplanes. Both psychotherapists and trainers are engaged in the process of modifying the behavior of their fellow human beings. And in that respect, at least, I would submit, they are in the same business. Thank you very much.